So welcome everybody to the IEP form one page at a time. This training was actually the brainchild of one of our parent advisors, Anna Acosta, and she was saying, so many times we have people calling and we're asking things like, well, what's your child's eligibility? Or, what kind of services they get? And, people just sometimes are not even sure where to find that on the IEP form. And it's people who have been to IEP meetings. In fact, there's a place here, which I'll let you know when we get to it, that I didn't know. And I've been to more than a couple IEPs. So many of you know Matrix, and or some of you might be here for the first time, but just a little bit about us. We're here to empower families of children with special needs to successfully understand and access systems that serve them. So we basically want you to become the effective advocate for your child because you're the one who's going to be there for the long haul. And we want to help you strategize with that, whether it's planning and helping with IEPs or health issues or SSI issues or whatever. Please just call our helpline. We're happy to help, but we are not advocates. We're advisors, and we want to help you become the effective advocate for your child. And who am I? Well, Alyssa DeFilippo, as I said, I'm Director of Parent Services at Matrix. I came to Matrix about 10 years ago. I wanted to facilitate support groups because I think that a support group is an essential and authentic way of helping all of us get through what we're going through. Here I am, I've become the Director of Parent Services through lots of rewarding work working with families like yours. I have a 22-year-old and a 25-year-old. My 22-year-old has Prader-Willi syndrome, and she's 22. She just graduated from the Marin County transition program and is now doing a home day program that we put together. We had put together an individualized day program that had her out in the community quite a bit, but given COVID, she's not out in the community quite a bit, and we had to be flexible and go with a home day program, which is working okay. I am a fellow member of the tribe, and I've been to over 20 IEPs, both mine and others. So I know a little bit about these forms that I'm happy to share with you today. We're hoping that you leave here knowing information that should be included in the IEP, what information is important and where to find it on each page, and how to find that information when you need it. Just before we get into the forms, just a little bit about IDEA, which is the Individual with Disabilities Education Act. It's the federal law that provides for and governs special education. Again, just a brief overview. If you have any questions on this, please do call our helpline. We have specific trainings on different parts of it that are given throughout the year. So if you want to take a deeper dive into any one of these 6 sections, please do. I encourage it actually because knowledge is power. But just for today, just from what we'll be talking about a little bit, I want to make sure everybody knows what FAPE is. It's free, appropriate public education. Now, we all want what's best for our children, but it is not free best public education. It's free appropriate. So I just encourage you to start using the language of the law, because that shows to the IEP team that you're an informed member and that you understand what the law is and what it's for and how it is supposed to provide. So again, just to replace that word best with the word appropriate in your conversations. There are assessments and appropriate evaluations that are part of IDEA. Those need to be given. That's where everything begins. That's where things start. That's the bottom of the pyramid, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Then you have the Individualized Education Program. You might see it called an Individualized Education Plan or Program. But just remember that it's 3 things. It's the program, it's the meeting, and it's also the document, the actual form. And it's the form that we're going to be talking about today. LRE is the least restrictive environment. And the thing to remember about LRE is that schools are required by law to provide an education in the least restrictive environment. So a private school or a non-public school, which is for students with disabilities, is a more restrictive environment than say, a special day class on a campus, on a school campus. There needs to be parent and student participation in decisions. That's written into the IDEA, as well as what's called procedural safeguards. That's the rights that you see up there on the screen. Procedural safeguards are the rights and remedies that parents and your students have in special education. And we actually have a couple of trainings coming up about procedural safeguards. We've done the same thing with the procedural safeguards packet. Now that's what you get at IEP meetings, where they give to you and they say, these are your parents' rights. And it's about, 24 pages long. And if you were like me, you put it in the back of your file and maybe you don't look at it again. But I would encourage you to look at it and come to these trainings if you really don't know what procedural safeguards are, because we have a part 1 and a part 2. Part 1 goes over the rights of procedural safeguards, and part 2 goes over the remedies. So again, becoming familiar with all these rights and the remedies will empower you as an advocate for your child, and knowledge is power. Okay, so diving into the forms, what we just talked about. The IEP is a document in agreement between you and the child's district, and it serves the purpose of providing for your child educational benefit and making sure that the school districts are complying with IDEA. We want to keep in mind as we go through these pages that the IEP is supposed to follow a certain order. The meeting is supposed to follow a certain order. And the pages in the IEP should reflect that order. And we're going to be going through page by page, and let's keep that in mind. It all starts with assessments, as I talked about. So there's the pyramid right here. Assessments is the bottom rung of the assessment. You need to have a discussion about your child's current performance and needs before you can progress and talk about goals. The needs really dictate what the goals should be. And pretty much every need that's reflected in the assessments should be a goal for your child. Then you have services which work on helping the child succeed toward achieving the goals. And then only after you do assessments, goals, and services can you talk about placement. And that's the place where the services will be given, where the goals will be worked on. So the pages in the IEP, there are many. Ones that are always there are these that are listed here: the information eligibility, present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, special factors, statewide assessments, annual goals, services with the offer of FAPE, and remember, free, appropriate public education, educational setting, offer of FAPE, and then the signature and consent pages. And most IEPs will also have a notes page. And the notes page are the notes that are taken by either the facilitator, if he or she is the one taking the notes, or sometimes there might be a note taker. But that's what is said and recorded during the meeting. So that's something that you want to make sure is an accurate representation of what went on in the meeting before you sign. And we'll talk about that when we talk about our signature and parent consent. Sometimes the IEP has other forms included, and these are just some of them, not all of them. But if there's a behavior intervention plan, that would be included in the IEP. The transition services, this is more transition to adulthood. It's required that there's something called an ITP, an individual transition plan. That's part of the IEP once the child is 16, once the student is 16. There's a manifestation determination document. Those are for students who are facing any kind of disciplinary action. Hopefully you don't need to go there. And then there's an eligibility determination for specific learning disability. Now, we included those forms in the sample form packet that we sent out. Again, not everybody will have them. We're not going to go over them here, but we do have other trainings that talk about these forms, or you can always call the helpline. So this notice of meeting is not actually part of the IEP, but it's what you will receive before the IEP. And I just wanted to draw your attention to, the top line, which is what's the purpose of the meeting. It's pretty good to know that, to know whether it's initial, annual, triennial. It could be that it's two things. It could be an annual, and it could be for transition planning. And transition planning can be transition to preschool, transition to kindergarten, transition to middle school, transition to high school, or that transition to adulthood. The triennial takes place every 3 years, and whether the child continues eligibility comes up at this point. So it's good to know whether your IEP is actually a triennial or an annual. And if it's your initial or triennial, you want to make sure you have a copy of all the assessment reports, especially the psychoeducational assessment. You can ask for them prior to the IEP. Hopefully you're able to get them. It's good to ask for that in writing, just to make sure that they don't have to, districts don't have to give you reports before it, but if you've developed good relationships, if it's more than your first time at the rodeo and you've developed good relationships with people, chances are you'll get them, and you'll be able to maybe even discuss some of the assessments before the IEP with the specialists who do them. But I'm getting off track here. We're supposed to only be talking about the forms, but I tend to want to tell you everything at once. Who will attend the meeting is also very important. Now, there may be something on here that a person who is attending and you wonder why they're attending, so you might want to ask the IEP team that. There may be an omission of a general ed teacher, and you would like for that general ed teacher to be there. It's not required that every teacher of your child be at the IEP meeting. It is required that one general education teacher and one special education teacher attend. Nonetheless, it's worth asking if your child's in middle school and there's some issue with the math teacher, but the math teacher isn't attending, you might want to ask if that math teacher can attend, and give a couple of sentences as to why you think it would be good for your child's educational benefit. Also good to note that aides are usually not part of the IEP team meeting, but if necessary to help your child's educational benefit, you may want to ask if the aide can attend. My daughter didn't have an aide throughout her career until the transition program, and we did request that the aide attend, and they did say, sure. I mean, that's the person who works with her the most. Let's have her come too. So it could be done. You'll note that at the notice of the meeting, it does have something that talks about if you wish to audio tape the meeting. I was just about to talk about if you want to audio tape this meeting, you have to provide 24 hours notice. I would say that do that in writing and just make sure that everybody knows that you plan to audio tape it. But remember, that's kind of a double-edged sword. You'll hear everything that everybody around the table said, including you. And some people are sort of shocked when they hear back what they actually said. So just remember that it's a good tool, but it could be a double-edged sword. And what other parents have done is they invite a note taker, somebody who can just sit there and, a trusted friend, and might just be able to take notes for them. Or sometimes if you have two sets of parents coming, maybe one is assigned note taking and the other one is assigned the speaking duties. In any event, just you can audio tape it. You need to have 24 hours notice. And, sometimes what parents have reported too is that everybody around the table seems to maybe they're more restrained, or they don't say things they might have said if they didn't know that they were being recorded. So just things to consider when you're thinking about recording. And at the bottom of the page of the invitation are the options for whether you're going to attend. Yes, you're going to attend, and you're going to bring the following people. If you can't attend, you want to definitely check that you can attend and ask for some alternate times. If you plan on bringing anybody, whether it's going to be that note taker or maybe a family friend or a regional center case manager, certainly if you plan on bringing an advocate or an attorney, you definitely want to let people know in advance. You don't want to spring any kind of surprises. And again, if there's no conflict going on, we would encourage you maybe to not be bringing an advocate or an attorney to an IEP meeting, because that kind of sets a different tone. And if you need an interpreter, this is the place also to put that. And I'm sorry, but the red line is kind of over it, but I require assistance of an interpreter. You definitely want to check that box if you need that. And if you don't need it, but maybe your spouse does, you definitely want to check it as well. So that person can also understand what's going on. Okay, first page of the IEP. I want to call your attention to the dates. I can't tell you how many IEPs I've seen with dates that just did not seem um, they didn't seem to make sense with what the rest of the IEP was showing. So check the dates at the top of the page, the original special ed entry date, the annual IEP, the next eval, and the dates at the bottom of the page, the initial reference for special ed services, the person who's initiating the referral, the date the district received, the parent consent, all the dates need to line up with what's correct. There's also in the middle of the page, District of Special Education Accountability. That's your district of residence. And then there's the residence school. So those two things should also be listed on the first page. Further down on the page, well, actually, I'm sorry, at the top of the page too, under the dates is again, the purpose of the meeting. Now this should match the purpose of the meeting on the notice that you sent. You know, not essential, but nice for consistency. And you want to, you know, nice for accuracy that they match. A little bit further down, this is an area where, you know, when we talk to parents on the phone and say, what is your child's eligibility? They say, I don't know. And we say, well, do you have your IEP? Look on the first page, it's about 2/3 of the way down. That is where you'll see both the primary and secondary, if one exists, eligibility. And you know, those, there are like 13 eligibilities for special education. This is where they'll be. You're only the primary needs to be filled in. And the primary should be the one that most affects how the student performs in school. Right below the disabilities is this other highlighted section. Describe how students' disability affects involvement and progress in the general curriculum for preschoolers' participation in appropriate activities. Now, this is the question line that I told you I really didn't even notice that for several years. I didn't notice that question was even in there. But it's a very important question and it needs to be answered because it's not what the school will do for your student. And it's not just a statement of what the disability is. It should answer the question of how the disability impacts educational performance. So just a couple of examples. Auditory processing deficits adversely impact the student's ability to understand directions and complete activities in the general education setting. Or significant speech and language deficits interfere with the student's ability to interact with other students in a preschool setting. So it needs to address the how. So I'd really encourage you to go back to your first page of your IEP after this training and look and see what's there. And if it doesn't answer the how question, I would again encourage you to contact your IEP team and say, this really doesn't speak to the how my child's disability affects his or her learning. And it's important because we like to talk about the stranger test. I mean, let's just suppose that you moved or everybody from your IEP team suddenly got shifted. They left and you have new people populating it. You want to be able to pick up that document and really get a very clear picture of your child. And so this how is a very good overview kind of question, and it really does need to be accurate. Okay, on to the second page. The second page of the IEP is the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. At the top of the page, it should show strengths, preferences, and interests. Now, this is usually an overview written by your child's teacher, main teacher, probably. And it's really what they see as the strengths, preferences, and interests of your child. Now, you could have some input in this and you could say, oh, that's not what we see. But, normally, the teacher does have a pretty good sense of it. And it helps to develop the program of what's going to work for the student. Right below that, there's a section for parent input and concerns relevant to educational progress. This can't be filled out before the meeting, but if you bring with you, maybe a one page, maybe some bullets, maybe a paragraph. I'm not saying to bring a book or a treatise with you about your concerns, even though you may be able to fill a book with your concerns. You want just a one pager kind of thing, but bring it in writing. Now, I don't know if you're from one of the counties we serve, Napa, Solano, Sonoma, and Marin, Pretty much we all use the SACE system. And if you bring this, you can hand this to the facilitator and ask that it be put into the IEP. And that way your concerns are there in the IEP. And remember, if it's not written down, it wasn't said. So you could say something at the IEP, the person who's taking the notes could miss it. You miss it when you review the notes, and then you sign the IEP, and then the concern isn't there. So we would encourage you to come with something prepared that can be included in the IEP. A brief statement, have it in writing, and keep in mind that educational performance concerns relevant to educational progress, you know, the terms that they use, that doesn't just mean academics. And I think people know it's no secret now that social and emotional learning is extremely important, maybe more important than some of the academic subjects for your student. So write things in there that you're concerned about, because that's where you might be able to show a need for social skills training or lunch bunches or any number of things, or maybe even speech services if they don't get them because the speech language pathologist works with pragmatics. In any event, come with something, let your voice be heard here. And this is the place to really do it. And it's important that it's done at the beginning of the IEP, which is why it's there, why it's right below strengths, preferences, and interests. And those concerns should be addressed throughout the rest of the meeting, and then definitely noted in the notes section that you had some concerns and they were included in the IEP. Right underneath that is a section about the Smarter Balanced assessment. Now, these are the assessments that are given. I think they're national, and it definitely scores your child on the statewide standardized assessment. If your student has taken the test, the results will be here. If they haven't taken the test, there's a California alternate assessment. That's a little bit further down on the page. That's for students who have significant cognitive impairment and they're not taking the Smarter Balanced. Now, mind you, you can request that your child not be tested at all. I don't know a whole lot about these assessments because my child was never tested. It created way too much anxiety for her, so we opted out. There is a benefit to taking the test because you do get to see, you know, where your child kind of lands. But in any event, this is the page, the first page of the present levels is where you'll see that. Then you go on to the areas that will be reported on. Communication development, gross fine motor, you know, here they are. And the pre-academic, academic functional skills. That's, you know, that's the biggie. That's the important section that should briefly but thoroughly explain how your child is performing academically and identify his or her needs. Everything that's written in this section kind of serves as the baseline for the goals, which we'll talk about when we get to the goals section. If this is an IEP or an initial IEP or a triennial, all the needs identified in the assessment reports should be called out in this section. All sections need to be filled out, even if it's not applicable, it should be filled out. And at the end of the section, well, as I said, the goals would stem directly from the needs identified, but at the bottom of the present levels page, there should be a list, and it says the areas of needs in which goals will be written will include, and then it will list them, you know, reading, math, reading comprehension, writing comprehension, speech pragmatics and social skills, communication, you know, it'll be at the bottom of this page. The next page that in the IEP is the special factors page. Now, this is something that your student may be getting above and beyond what the general ed population gets. So if everybody in the school is getting iPads, getting an iPad would not be listed here. But if everybody in the school is not getting little pencil grips, well, a pencil grip is an assistive technology, even though it doesn't sound like it would be, it is. And if you had some kind of specialized app that was downloaded onto the iPad and it was for either voice recognition or speech recognition, whatever, that would be listed here. If your student is an English learner, that would be filled out here. And if your student has one of the low incidence services, and low incidence is visual impairment, hearing impairment, or orthopedic impairment. If your child has low incidence services, and if you don't know anything about them, it probably means your child doesn't have low incidence services. One special factor that we really want to call out that's fairly important here is the behavior. Does your student's behavior impede learning of self or others? If this is checked, yes, there definitely needs to be a behavior goal in the IEP, and there may even be a behavior intervention plan attached. We talk about that as being a form earlier on. If you have a behavior intervention plan, you definitely have to have a behavior goal, but you could have a behavior goal without having a behavior intervention plan. Usually the process starts with a behavior goal, but this definitely needs to be checked. And important to note that it's any behavior that impedes learning. It's not just a disruptive behavior, right? That's disrupting the rest of the class so nobody can learn. But if you have a student who's sitting and looking out the window, or not attending because they're constantly getting up and going to the bathroom, whatever it might be, that's a behavior, and that needs to be addressed because it is getting in the way of your child's learning. And here we go back to talking about assessments again, but this assessment is talking about the California Assessment of Student Performance and Progress, the CAASPP. It's given grades 3 through 8 and also grade 11. They can provide valuable information on how well your student is accessing the grade level curriculum. And if you have any questions on any of these tests that are checked, or any of the with designated supports, without designated supports, with accommodations, without accommodations. If something is checked on this page, or sometimes it extends onto a second page, there are lots of tests that could be listed. If you have any questions about that, ask your IEP team. If you want something there, like if you want accommodations and it's not listed, ask the IEP team. But our purpose is just to show you that this is the page where you'll find information about assessments. Read those little boxes, ask anything that you don't understand. Okay, so we're going to jump on into goals. So we're now getting to the heart of the IEP, because goals are how you know your child is making progress. Now, your child may have 2 or 3 goals. Your child may have 34 goals. At one point in time, my daughter had 34 goals. But goals are based on the child's needs that come from the assessments that are done. So if you have a child who's being assessed, for speech assessments and academic assessments and social emotional behavioral assessments, and, maybe OT, which is not one of the eligibilities, like a sensory issues are not part of an eligibility, but once you have an IEP, you can certainly be assessed for OT, for occupational therapy. I mean, if you have all those assessments, you're going to have a lot of needs. So even though 34 seemed like a lot, the needs were there. So if this is not your student's first IEP, you'll have 2 sets of goals to go through. You'll have the goals from last year that progress will be reported on after the present levels, after you go through present levels at the IEP. Well, that's kind of setting you up for the progress of where the last year's goals were. And if it's the first IEP, then you're only going to have 1 set of goals, and those are the goals for the coming year. So if there were goals from a previous year, on the goal page, you'll see the progress. And the first 3, they should all be filled in pretty much. If it's your annual IEP, all the progress reports are going to be filled in. If it's 6 months into the year, you may only have progress report 1 and progress report 2 filled in. If no is checked and it's an annual review, you want the team to discuss, what was it about that goal that your student couldn't meet it? Did they need a different kind of specialized programming? Does it need to be tweaked a bit? I know that school districts, they don't like to continue goals, but oftentimes our kiddos take, a year or 2 to learn something. So maybe the goal needs to be tweaked a bit, but the same idea is being carried forward into the next year. So on the goal sheet, you have the area of need. Now, this could be, math, reading, writing comprehension, social skills. This is the place where you have the area of the need. And this I mentioned before when we were talking about present levels, the baseline. The baseline should be what your student can do now. And it will track what was said on the present levels page. And it should track what is said. Sometimes I've seen, actual sentences from the present level brought into the baseline, and that's fine. That's good. That means that there's continuity. But sometimes you'll see something that's just total exposition, and you're saying, that really doesn't give the complete picture. If a stranger picked this up, right, the stranger test, if a stranger picked this up, would they understand where my child was in math right now based on this baseline? And if the answer is no, then that baseline needs to be changed. So up here is where you'll have the measurable goal. It should be a SMART goal. S stands for specific, M measurable, attainable, R is for relevant, and T time sensitive. That's basically it. Sometimes you'll see different ones for A and R, but that's basically what a SMART goal is. We have a short video that you can click on and take a look at. It's about 17 minutes, and it was the video that was done when we had at Dominican University in Marin, we had a goal night where we'd bring parents to work with special education teachers, and they'd bring their goals, and we do a workshop about goals with the parents. And it was well attended and well liked by both the special ed teaching students and parents. We don't have them right now, but we hope to get back to doing them. But this video was sent out prior to the meeting so that both parents and the special ed teachers alike could get a little primer on what a SMART goal is. So, please feel free to click on that. We have our goals training coming up in the spring. So you can check back and attend that if you want to know more about what goes into a SMART goal. The purpose of the goal should also be checked here. Now, it could be a couple of them are checked. Could be just one. Important to know that something is checked here. And the person responsible, this is the teacher or a therapist. It's not the student, and really should never be the parent. None of the progress reports will be filled in on the coming year goals, right? Because it hasn't happened yet. Okay, back to FAPE and LRE, just for a little refresher here. FAPE, what does it mean? Everybody together? Free, appropriate public education. So the next pages of the IEP are going to spell out what the district is offering, so that constitutes FAPE. It'll talk about accommodations, modifications, supports, and services so that your student can receive, it's another buzz term you're going to learn, educational benefit, and make progress on their goals. It also spells out where these services will be provided, what kind of setting. That's the placement part of it. And let's remember that LRE stands for least restrictive environment. And if your student is not being educated in the home school, in the general education classroom, the IEP team needs to justify that in the IEP. So the first page is services offer of FAPE. Here at the top, all service options that were considered by the IEP team need to be listed. And in selecting LRE, they need to describe consideration given to any harmful effect on the child or the quality of services that he or she needs. So in this section should be things like if the school district is looking to, or if you as the parent are looking to move your child into, say, a non-public school, an NPS, that's specific to children with a specific disability. It needs to, maybe did they try having an aide in the classroom and did that not work? So that's where you find something like this, like that on your offer of FAPE page. So all of the supports and options that were considered need to be listed. And even if they were rejected, they need to be listed, and maybe a little sentence as to why they were rejected. And remember, again, stranger test. If somebody picks up this IEP, they should get a really full picture of your child. And this is another important section. Working down the page, you start talking about supports, supplementary aids. So first, there are these two check boxes about accommodations. Accommodations are not needed, or the following accommodations are needed. And accommodations are things like extra time to finish those general ed assignments, preferential seating, taking breaks, using a calculator. it's important to see the difference, know the difference between an accommodation and a modification. So where an accommodation is something like preferential seating or doing less problems on a homework because it just takes the kid too long to do the homework, modifications are actually changes to the curriculum, changes to the content. That's being altered. And it's important to know that in high school, modifications can actually affect whether the student gets full academic credit for a class. And if the student is on the diploma track, it's really important to know this going in, know this in 9th grade, because then you're going to realize whether or not you can actually get that diploma because you need a certain amount of credits to get the diploma. This is another section here. The IEP team discussed and determined other supports for school personnel. This is a very important section, and I only discovered this probably when my daughter was in maybe 4th grade or so. And see, I didn't call Matrix. I didn't have Matrix helping me from the time she was 3. I mean, they called me, but I got to tell you, I wasn't calling them back, but I just really, I encourage you to call, because this stuff, it's really essential, and it helps you to be the most effective advocate for your child that you can be when you have this knowledge. Okay, so back to this section. This is where you can have other supports for school personnel. So we actually had trainings on Prader-Willi syndrome because it's a rare disorder. People don't know what it is, nor do they know how it manifested itself in my daughter. So we would go in and do trainings to the school staff so that they understood the safety and security that was important. I mean, Prader-Willi syndrome, the people always want to eat. Their hypothalamus isn't functioning correctly, and they have difficulty with control mechanisms, appetite being one of them. So we had to have, as an example, garbage covers put on garbage cans so she couldn't reach into garbage and get food out. Well, now the school didn't know that, so we had to go in and do trainings about that for the school. So this section is to put in any kind of training for any kind of consultation between a behavior specialist and a classroom teacher. Say you've had a private speech therapist who's worked with your student for 8 years, and now there's a new speech therapist coming into the school district. Maybe you might want to have a consult between those 2 speech therapists. This is where it belongs, and it's an important thing to know and use. Just don't know it's there, use it. So down here is the services page, which we're going to go into a little bit more on the next page, but this is where services such as the OT, PT, and the speech are listed. I just want to draw your attention to, this red line is going over it, but the special education transportation. So if your student is placed out of district, or other special circumstances apply, like they're in a wheelchair or something, transportation is a related service, and this box should be checked, and you can ask for it. So just be aware of that box. And then the extended school year, ESY. This is a program, this isn't like summer school that could be offered to non-special ed students, although I'm not sure districts are doing it anymore. But anyway, this is not for non-special ed students. It's for special ed students, those who would lose skills if instruction stopped over the summer. And extended school year will have its own special education and related services area if indeed ESY is being offered. Offer of FAPE. This needs to be filled out with all the services that your student is getting. So the type of service, whether it's specialized academic instruction, speech therapy, occupational therapy, the important thing to look at here is the individual and group boxes. So say your student is getting speech therapy 60 minutes a week. The 60 minutes would be here, 60 minutes per week, but then maybe individual or group isn't checked. Now, you've talked to the speech therapist that it's going to be 30 minutes individual and 30 minutes group, but it's not in the IEP. So if it's not in the IEP, it's not going to be done. You can't go back and look at it. It could be done, but it might not be done. So you want to make sure that whatever the agreement is, those boxes are checked and even spelled out. 60 minutes a week total, 30 minutes individual, 30 minutes group, so that you have that there. The other box, the SEC transition, that's when the 18 to 22 transition programs, what services you're getting in those. At least that's what I think it is. So the type, the when the service starts and ends. And this usually coincides with the school year. And then, as I said, the ESY has their own services that coincide with the ESY school year, which usually runs about a month. Who's providing the service? Is it somebody from Office of Education? Is it the SELPA? You know, who is the provider of the service? And then the duration and frequency, how often and how long. I talked about that with the example. Is it daily, once a week, monthly, and how long they'll be provided. Usually that's in minutes per week or month, or sometimes you see the minutes per year. And this is where you have to use those math skills and kind of back it out and just make sure that, that what the number is correct. And if you need help with it, again, ask, be a vocal member of the IEP team. Where the service takes place. Is it in the regular classroom, or is the student going to be pulled out and go into the speech room? It's just important to know. Individual or group we talked about, and any other questions about how the service will be used. Examples could be which period it will happen, or how the time will be divided between the individual and the group. That's what the comments section is for. So sometimes that comments section can be, you know, more than a couple of lines, but that's okay, because it's important to make sure that everything that is said is documented in the services. We're still on, now we're on offer of FAPE, educational setting. Again, your district of service and the school of attendance will be listed at the top. This should be the same as that was on the first page. Are all the special education services provided at the student's school of residence? It has to be a yes or a no. If the no is checked, remember LRE, least restrictive environment, that there needs to be a rationale as to why the student isn't in their home school in the general education classroom. So you just want to check all this for accuracy. Down here in the program setting, this refers to the school. Is it a regular classroom? Is it a separate school? Is it a residential facility? Is the student in a home or hospital? If any of these services are provided at a school other than the student's home school, again, the reason must be given. And then here you have the percentage, the time of time the student is outside the regular class and the student is inside the regular class. So these percentages of time need to add up to 100%. If they don't, you want to make sure that the IEP team knows they don't and that it's changed to show that they are 100% of the student's time is accounted for, not 120%, as I have seen on some IEPs. Moving down the page, you have promotion criteria. Now, if your student is on the, if the curriculum is not modified and on the diploma track, you're going to see this box checked district. If your student is getting a certificate and you pretty much know that, then it's going to say progress on goals or other. It's also going to say here where the parents will be informed of the progress. Will it be quarterly, trimester, semester? Normally it goes along with the progress reports that you saw in that goal. So it's usually 3 times a year and the annual. It's not a report card though. You know, it's progress on goals, which is very individual for each student. And you want to make sure that you're getting individualized information in those progress goals. There's also something down here. The activities that support transition. So this could be, again, transition to preschool, kindergarten, middle school, or high school. It's also transition to adulthood. There used to be something on the bottom of this form that was taken out about 2 or 3 years ago, and it was called a graduation plan. And it was only filled in if the student was in 7th grade or older, and it would talk about whether or not the graduation plan was to get a diploma or to get a certificate of completion. Now, I don't know the age groups of the people. When we have in-person trainings, we usually go around and we introduce ourselves and we say what our child's disability is if you want to, and you say the age, so we have a better idea. But if there's anybody out there who has a middle schooler, I would encourage you to ask the IEP team, when you get to this page of the educational setting and say, what about a graduation plan? Do you think we're on the diploma track? Do you think we're on the certificate track? Because as I explained before, those accommodations and modifications that become much more important in high school when it looks at getting credit in order to get that diploma, you want to know about them so you can plan. And I'm not quite sure why this was taken off this page, but the only place we find it now is on that ITP, that individual transition plan I told you about. And that only needs to be in an IEP when the child is 16. The young adult is 16. So it's too late then to try and change things. So it's just important to know. And again, if you have a middle schooler or definitely a high schooler, I encourage you to go to our website, go down to the landing page, go down a little bit and click on the Transition to Adulthood website within a website that we have. We call it the Transition to Adulthood Guide. And that will walk you through. What we did is we collected lots and lots of resources. There's so much out there on transition to adulthood, but on every area on education, employment, and living skills, and just living, independent living. We've collected them all, and we think we've collected them all. Hopefully we have. If we haven't, let us know and we'll add something. But we go through the 6 essential resources, and then we go through like a roadmap to where you might want to be and how you go through from 7th grade on up. And again, I'm going off track here, but I think it's very important, and I don't know why they took this off this page, but if you have a middle schooler or definitely a high schooler, you need to be talking about their transition early and often. That's my soapbox for the day. Okay, so again, the student's IEP could include this individual transition plan. It could include behavior intervention plan, and it should include those notes. So this is where those pages would be inserted before you get to the consent signature page. We're not covering those. Please call us if you need to. We could always have a Zoom helpline call and you could share your screen and show something on a form that you don't understand. We want to make sure you know everything there is to know about your IEP and your student. So we're willing to help in any way we can. The signature and consent page. Okay. So at the top of the signature and consent page, this usually gets passed around in the beginning of the meeting. And this, you're not signing an agreement to anything, you're merely signing your attendance. So everybody sitting around that table is going to sign. The student too. I would advocate, just another little plug here. Start bringing your student to IEP meetings again, as early as you think is possible, even if it's just a few minutes in the beginning to say, hi, my name is John, I'm in 2nd grade and I love math. And then they leave. But just get them used to going and talking at their team meeting because it is their team meeting. And, eventually the goal could be that you're raising and the IEP team is helping to raise this really effective and competent self-advocate who's able to run their own IEP meeting by the time they're a senior in high school. I mean, that's pretty cool. I've seen some videos of kids doing it. My daughter didn't do it, but I've seen them and it gives you chills. So the top page indicates attendance, and that's going to be signed. Now, the bottom of the page is where you're consenting to the IEP. So important to note, you can consent to all of it, you can consent to part of it, or you can consent to none of it. This is where you also have to X if your child isn't eligible for special education, and that would be during an initial IEP where they're reading out and saying, no, not eligible, or it's after a triennial and your child is no longer eligible for special ed. Important to note that you don't need to consent at the meeting and you don't need to sign at the meeting. If you feel like everything is fine and you've signed at your meeting all the time, then and you have a knowledge of the IEP team members and it feels good to you, then go ahead and sign. We're not saying you shouldn't, but it's good, especially to review that notes page. If you take it home, give it a few days, don't give it a few months, give it a few days, and then sign and give it back. You're not really, it's not hurting anyone at that point. And also, if you've contacted one of our matrix parent advisors and you've talked about the IEP pre-IEP and you strategized and worked with somebody, you might want to have them take a look at it before you sign it. That's what we're here for. So this is where that happens. This parent involvement piece, I actually think this is fairly new, and there's really a push on right now to improve services and results for your child by involving the parent. And there are a number of ways that this is done. And one of the huge parent involvement pieces, I think, is being a member of your CAC. They have that, every district, every SELPA needs to have one. It's called SEAC, SEAC in Marin, and it's the CAC in Solano, Sonoma, and Napa. But that is a way that the parent voice is heard. They're meetings of special ed parents. It's like having a district-wide special ed PTA. So I'm sure your district or your school has links to it. We have links on our site to each of the community committees in each of our counties. And I encourage you to take part and let your voice be heard. There's also a section that asks about Medi-Cal eligibility, and we have people call about this all the time. You do not have to fill this out. If you fill it out, then the school can say, oh, Medi-Cal will pay for this service and we don't need to necessarily pay for the speech therapy or something like that. I'm not entirely clear, but all I know is that you do not have to fill that out. You do not have to say your child is on Medi-Cal and, you know, Bob's your uncle, it's done. You don't have to worry about it. There are also these boxes at the bottom where it says, there it is. You've received a copy of your procedural safeguards and you received a copy of the assessment reports. You've received a copy of the individual education plan. Do not sign and X this box if you have not received a copy. You know, sometimes people leave the IEP without a copy because, oh, the copier was broken. They didn't have time to make it, whatever. Don't sign saying that you've received it because you haven't received it, right? Okay. And there I am at the end. Well, thank you, everyone.